Hello again, and in this video I'm going to be talking about ion transport and how it relates to active transport. However, I'm going to give a brief overview of passive transport and relationship to how that relates to active transport. So when we're first looking at passive transport, we could think of an example of passive transport being simple diffusion. Now with simple diffusion, it does not require the use of a transport protein, and we have an example of it where we have small nonpolar molecules such as O2 or N2, and these are gases, and they're able to diffuse through the membrane. And as they're nonpolar, they're able to diffuse through due to the fact that the inner portion of this phospholipid bilayer are the tails, which are nonpolar. Now, another example of passive transport is facilitated diffusion, and this requires a transport protein. However, this diffusion, even though there's a transport protein, moves along their concentration gradient from high to low, which is different from active transport that moves against the concentration gradient and requires energy. So an example of facilitated diffusion could be a uniport system where we have glucose moving outside extracellularly, as inside there's a high concentration of glucose. And once it moves extracellularly, it is going along its concentration gradient. So now if we look at active transport, we can look at how the ATP-driven pump, the light-driven pump, and the coupled transporters such as the symporter and the antiporter relate to this process. So firstly, looking at the ATP-driven pump, we see an example of this being the sodium-potassium pump. As shown by the picture, the ATP-driven pump requires energy, and this energy causes a conformation change in the transporter protein and therefore allows molecules to influx and efflux out. So with that sodium-potassium pump, we see that 3 sodium molecules are going to move extracellularly outside of the cell, and 2 potassium molecules are going to move inside of the cell. Now, considering the fact that potassium is in high concentration inside and sodium is in high concentration outside, these are moving against their concentration gradients as they're going from low to high concentration. Now, if we look at the example of the light-driven pump, we see that the light also acts as energy, and this energy can cause conformational changes, and that can also lead to molecules influxing or effluxing out of the cell. Now, lastly, if we look at the coupled transporter examples, we can see that there's the symporter and the antiporter. Now, with the symporter is when 2 molecules, or more than that, are able to move either outside of the cell or inside the cell, but the fact of the matter is both these cells are moving together in the same fashion. So an example of a symporter reaction could be the secondary active transport reaction, transport ability of the sodium and glucose contra supporter. And this contra supporter allows for the transport of glucose against its concentration gradient going inside of the cell, and the sodium will move along its concentration gradient. And this is why it's an example of secondary active transport, as the sodium is moving along its concentration gradient, but the glucose is moving against its concentration gradient. Now, an example of the antiport, again, is with that ATP-driven pump. As we see, sodium is moving out, and the potassium is moving in. So these molecules are going against each other, as one is going out and one is going in. However, both these molecules are moving against their concentration gradients, and therefore this is an example of primary active transport. So overall, this video just gives a brief synopsis of the different processes of active transport and how it relates to ion transport. Thank you.